This is Channel 2 Boston, public television in stereo for New England. Local broadcast of the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour is made possible by grants from the Bank of Boston, Computer Fair, producers of the 8th Northeast Computer Fair and Unix Systems Expo at the Bayside Exposition Center, and by contributions from you, our viewers.
Good evening. These are the top news headlines. South Africa took another step towards limiting apartheid. Britain expelled 25 Soviet officials as spies following the defection of a top KGB agent. A federal judge refused to block tomorrow's test of an anti-satellite weapon. Details of these stories coming up. Jim Lehrer is away tonight. Judy Woodruff's in Washington. Judy?
We have a newsmaker interview and two focus sections on the NewsHour tonight. First, growing talk on Capitol Hill about trade. Our newsmaker is House Republican leader Robert Michel. Then, abortion by pill. Still in the experimental stage, but it's fueling an already heated dispute. And finally, a documentary report on changing times in the Louisiana Bayou, where shrimping has become a way of life.
Funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour is provided by AT&T. Whether it's telephone, information systems, long-distance services, or computers, AT&T. Funding is also provided by this station and other public television stations, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
The President's Council of South Africa today called for abolition of the pass laws, a key instrument of apartheid. It was the second step in 2 days by the white power structure to modify the system of racial separation. Yesterday, President P.W. Botha said South African citizenship would be restored to blacks in the independent homelands. The recommendation today on pass laws came from an advisory body dominated by the ruling National Party. Here's a report from Michael Burke of the BBC.
The pass is the hated symbol of apartheid and the black state-imposed inferiority. It's the instrument of what the government calls influx control, a web of discriminatory laws that determine where a black can live, where he can seek work. Blacks have to queue for permission to look for jobs in the white cities and the chance to live in a black satellite township nearby. What they can and cannot do is stamped on the pass. 250,000 blacks are arrested for pass law offences every year, one every 2 minutes. John Nkuna has lost his construction job in Johannesburg. He was sacked for not hearing an order from his white boss. Today, he came to the advice centre run by the Black Sash organisation for help. Because he's lost his job, he can't stay here and will have to go back to a remote rural homeland.
The implications of this are that he will never be offered a job there because of the present economic climate. They would only give jobs in the urban areas to urban people. So, I mean, he could sit there forever waiting to be offered a job, and he is in a bad position at the moment.
The council, packed with government nominees, says influx control hasn't worked. It's degrading, discriminatory, unjustifiable. The laws restricting blacks' movements must go.
We are coming forward with recommendations that this should be replaced by a positive approach to urbanization, and that it should be on a non-discriminatory basis, irrespective of color, creed.
Migrant workers forced by law to live in hostels and kept apart from their families for all but 3 weeks a year would be the first to benefit. Their families would be allowed to join them. 1.5 million blacks hiding in squatter camps around the cities would no longer be illegal, though the council says unrestricted squatting should not be allowed. The council says blacks should not have to spend up to 6 hours a day commuting to work from remote homes. 1.5 hours should be the maximum. All these recommendations cautiously welcomed by blacks, but rejected by right-wing whites.
Unrest continued in many black communities today, and 7 more blacks were killed. A white school teacher and 10 of her black pupils were shot and wounded by police in the township of Soweto. In Washington, Chester Crocker, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, said if the Botha government adopted the pass law recommendation, it would be a very important step. In the Senate, the Democrats failed again to force a vote on sanctions stronger than those adopted by President Reagan. The Democrats gave up for the present. Judy?
The British government today accused 25 Soviets living in Britain of being spies and ordered them out of the country. The Foreign Office in London said it was going on the word of the chief KGB operative in Britain, Oleg Gordievsky, who it said had defected and been granted political asylum. It was the biggest such expulsion in some 14 years. We have a report from John Simpson of the BBC.
As far as we know, it's the biggest success which MI5, from its headquarters in central London, has scored in 14 years. It's also probably the biggest that any Western security organization has scored in that time. As KGB boss in London, Oleg Gordievsky would have known everyone who was working for him in Britain. Not just the full-time agents of Soviet nationality, but the contacts, the part-timers, and any so-called moles, British people working for the Russians who've burrowed their way into the British system. Today's list of expulsions, therefore, is a kind of who's who of the KGB in London. 4 of them are journalists, ostensibly correspondents for Izvestia, TASS and Pravda. One is a correspondent for Radio Moscow. The largest number, 14, work for the Soviet trade delegation, which has its headquarters in the London suburb of Highgate. Their job would be to get British industrial secrets. 6 are officially accredited diplomats, a sizable proportion of the entire embassy list. This was the Soviet response at their embassy today, the embassy where, until recently, Mr. Gordievsky worked.
The Soviet personnel in the United Kingdom, be they diplomatic, administrative, or technical staff, are engaged in performing their duties to promote the development of relations between our countries. All accusations or insinuations as to the alleged illegal activities of the Soviet representatives have nothing to do with reality.
A federal judge today rejected a request by 4 Democratic congressmen and others to block tomorrow's scheduled test of an anti-satellite weapon. Judge Norma Johnson of the U.S. District Court in Washington said the case presents a political question that, in her words, should not be decided in this forum. She said she would issue a written opinion later. The congressman and the group known as the Union of Concerned Scientists had sought to stop the Reagan administration from going ahead with the test because they contend the president has not made a good faith effort to negotiate a ban on anti-satellite weapons with the Soviet Union.
President Reagan continued his fall offensive for tax reform today, despite signals from Congress that trade legislation, not taxes, is their priority. In a speech to senior citizens in Tampa, Florida, Mr. Reagan appealed for voters to help and outflanking the special interests, he said, are already dug in around Capitol Hill.
They want to preserve certain tax shelters and loopholes and make the rest of us pay for the special treatment that they and their big money clients receive. Well, if we're going to outflank those special interests and get this tax reform passed, a certain senior citizen is going to need your help. There's a fellow named Ronald Reagan.
One of the clearest signals that tax reform is not on the front burner as far as the Congress is concerned came today from the man who's been chiefly responsible for pushing the president's tax plan on Capitol Hill. Congressman Dan Rostenkowski told reporters at a news conference that members' appetites for a tough trade policy has grown so that recent word the president is finally preparing his own trade plan could well be too little, too late.
It took the entire Republican leadership to convince the White House that the hardline Democratic position was both timely and just. 2 months ago, the administration attacked our bill as protectionist. Now, political and economic reality has forced the administration on a wide U-turn. The fact that he's done this U-turn, it gives me every indication that he's recognizing it, and the Republican minority on the House side is recognizing it as a vulnerable area.
At the World Court in The Hague, the first testimony was heard on Nicaragua's charge that the United States has disregarded the court's ban on aid for the rebels in Nicaragua. The court has no power to enforce its rulings, and the United States is not represented at the proceedings. The judges heard lawyers and witnesses from Nicaragua arguing that the number of rebel attacks in their country has increased, and that the American National Security Council directs the rebel strategy and selects their targets. The United States has accused the Nicaraguans of using the court as a forum for propaganda. In Washington, a human rights group called America's Watch charged both the government of El Salvador and the leftist rebels there with violating the laws of war by attacking civilians this year. And in El Salvador, soldiers and policemen raided a dozen houses said to be rebel hideouts. They were searching for kidnappers who seized President Duarte's daughter, Inés Guadalupe Duarte Duran, and a woman companion. In one house, they found documents and weapons, but no trace of the missing women.
In Portugal, officials said today that at least 49 people were killed when two passenger trains collided yesterday. Early estimates last night had put the number at more than 100. Today, rescue workers were searching the wreckage of the two trains for more bodies, and at least 3 were found. Officials say they are not sure how many were aboard either the southbound express or the northbound local train. Both were traveling on the same track, and they ran into each other head-on. The wrecked cars plunged down a 30-foot embankment and burst into flames.
Coming up on the NewsHour, the Republican leader in the House, Bob Michel, talks about trade protection. We have a documentary report and a debate about a new pill its inventor claims will abolish abortion. And we close with a look at a way of life that is changing for the Cajun shrimp fishermen of Louisiana.
Our lead segment tonight is a newsmaker interview with the top-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives, Minority Leader Robert Michel. He joins us at a time of frenzied activity for Republicans on Capitol Hill. When party leaders have been busy persuading President Reagan, he does need to offer up a tougher trade posture after all. That's as the Democrats are on the verge of pushing through some tough protectionist legislation, and at a time of increasing signs of strain between the White House and its Republican allies in the Congress. Mr. Michel, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Just how much of a sentiment is there on Capitol Hill for some kind of new, tough trade legislation?
Well, I think there's no question, but that has not only has been on both sides of the aisle where you get this kind of feeling, I think, particularly after members have been back home. There's been a loss of jobs. I think they equate it with some of our trade policy. Hearing Congressman Rostenkowski just a few moments ago, I'm reminded, of course, of what the approach of some would be to put a 25% import duty, you know, from Japan or South Korea or Taiwan
this is
or
a
Brazil.
Democrat proposal.
Yes, and what I want to see our Republican position much more positive in nature. We don't want to build a wall around this country, but neither do we want to turn the other cheek. We've had it pretty many times now. I'd rather see us posturing ourselves in a much more positive way. How do we open the doors? How do we punch holes in the walls that have sealed us out? And so we've got several measures in which we'd like to advance when the time comes.
Well, I know you've been involved in some of these discussions with the White House. Just how much persuading did it take to get the president to agree to come on to sign on to some kind of legislation?
Well, I've been a little distressed because they've been somewhat dragging their feet, but I know that Mac Baldridge, our Secretary of Commerce, for example, for several years now has been on our side in that sense that we ought to be talking more about it. The Clayton Yiter just coming aboard as our new trade ambassador is a good thing. The two of them have been in several key policy discussions and with the president of recent weeks here now, so that we now know, in my opinion, that we've got that issue up on the front burner where it belongs.
Well, how much talking did it take to turn the president around on
Well, basically, you know, I have no problem with the president's overall thrust of wanting to be a free trader, of not building tariff walls, going back to Smoot-Hawley or anything of that nature. By the same token, we're we're sensing out in the country more and more restiveness to the degree that if we don't have an alternative to what I see some of our more protectionist-minded people proposing, then I think we're in real trouble.
But what I'm asking is, as you just heard mention Congressman Rostenkowski, he was saying it took the entire congressional Republican leadership to turn the president around. Is that true?
Well, it took some persuading, I guess, yes, and I regret that, but you know, we're there now, and we're now got it up there on the front burner, and I'm grateful for that.
Well, now, what is the president's position? Now, what, in general, what is the kind of legislation we can look for?
Well, I can't tell you specifically what he's going to sign on to, but I can tell you there are several things that we've proposed. For example, the tightening up of the Section 301 of the Tariff Act, or the Trade Act, which there were 5 cases last week that were announced.
Now, this is
frankly, that's the broadest, that gives the president the broadest authority to really get the attention of our trading partners out there. He could, as a matter of fact, impose tariffs or quotas or new rules and regulations that would be rather punitive. I don't think he's going to go that far, but I think whenever we've had this unfairness so manifested as it has been on some of these items, then it seems to me the president's got to take a little bit more aggressive approach and utilize that authority which is his.
Now, would that be the centerpiece of any new
No, I'm not sure that, you know, he will buy on to that. I'm saying that we're trying to move him in that direction. There's also a $300 million war chest for export-import bank financing. Now, here initially they were talking about maybe Xing out export-import bank funding, calling it corporate welfare and all the rest. Now, some of our larger multinationals use that to get credit, to arrange a credit sale abroad. Now, what's happened is some of our European counterparts, and Japan particularly, not only lower interest rates in financing a sale, but also a grant, an outright grant. Now, that's unfair. And so we're prepared now, I think, with this kind of a war chest to meet them head-to-head in this area.
But now, isn't this exactly the sort of thing that the president has said in the past time and again he did not want to do, that he wanted to stay away from interfering in the free market, the free trade system? I mean, isn't this somewhat inconsistent with what the president's argued in the past?
Well, and I'll tell you quite frankly, I suppose the Secretary of State, Mr. Schultz, would have a little bit different view than I would, or even the Secretary of Commerce, on this issue, because the diplomatic corps usually always wants to cater to the will of our trading partners, or I would have even some suggestion for our ambassadors abroad, that they take a little bit different position with respect to trade, not so much telling us what that country would like to do by way of gaining concession from us, but taking a tougher line on what they ought to do to cater to our requests. For example, just recently, in the question of ethanol coming in from Brazil, under the CBI, where we had a 60-cent a gallon tariff duty, why, blending that, they're coming in trying to circumvent what we had set up as a tariff duty and doing injury to our own corn producers, for example, in this country.
But in pointing out this and some other measures, I mean, what you're describing is potentially a change of heart on the part of this president. Why? Why at this time? Well,
I tell you, the president's a very pragmatic individual, and he has got his ear tuned to the public's need out there. He's not isolated and in a cocoon. From a general philosophical point of view, Bob Michel has always basically been a free trader. I've adjusted to being a fair trader, but when I see time and time again that we're not getting the fair kind of quid pro quo, then it seems to me we've got to take a little bit different stance here, and that's what we're talking about.
What do you say then to the Democrats specifically, and I guess Mr. Rostenkowski's one of them, who's saying, all right, the White House is doing this, the Republicans are doing it because they saw the Democrats were about to push through some tough trade legislation, specifically on textiles. And they're just doing this because they want to say we've done something when the president has to veto that textile bill.
Well, of course, there's no question, but that you get to that extreme of whether it's shoes, whether it's textiles, whether it's glass, or some of these other things, and I don't like that kind of protectionist attitude. But if we can fashion something on our Republican side, both House and Senate, with the administration, that meets, at least part way, this kind of injury, then I think we're on the right course. Now, we're not going to go so far as some of those people would like to have us go, I'm sure. And the president would have that opportunity to veto legislation which is unfavorable to him. But then we also ought to have an alternative. And this wouldn't be the first time that this member would have to respond to the will of a majority, in this case, an overwhelming majority in the House.
So you're acknowledging that if this textile legislation goes through, the president vetoes it, that's part of the strategy here. The White House would be able to say, well, we've come up with a plan of our own.
Well, we haven't really talked of it in that light. Our discussion has mostly been, let's put together a package as best we can that emphasizes the positive rather than the negative. And I'll tell you, protection doesn't protect. And we've got to be wary of that.
You've acknowledged in several ways the president has been late to come on board on this issue. As you know, people around this town are saying that the posture the White House has taken on this issue, on trade, being on the defensive, in other words, reacting to what others are doing, is, and the way it reacted on South Africa earlier this week, is very different from the way the White House reacted on issues during the first term, when the president was initiating on tax cuts and initiating on budget cuts.
Well, let's face it, when he was campaigning initially, you know, he talked about building up the country's defenses, cutting taxes, and cutting expenditures. Those are the three hallmarks of his initial campaign. And we achieved all three of those, you know, in the first term. Now we come, and of course, when you're really reducing the resources of the country to have new programs, there's been really very little opportunity or flexibility to propose new programs if they cost money. So we're frankly in the same mold of trying to improve that lot of the people out there. I think we got 8 million more people employed. Interest rates are down, you know, inflation is down. There's some good things we can talk about yet. It isn't all that dire, but
there are differences. You're saying there are differences between the first. I mean, tax reform, for example, the president was pinning all his hopes on tax reform. Now we find out, we're hearing this week, it's not even going to get to the Senate until next year. And after the president worked on this issue, pushed it, even the members of the Republican
But this is only the first year of his second term, you know, and even on that pledge, you know, that we would never, that he would never be for any kind of tax increase. I don't know that that's a 4-year pledge. I've never talked to him specifically about it. But if we've got to really narrow that deficit, that also has a very important impact on trade. The strength of the dollar vis-a-vis the foreign currencies, and that comes back very directly to that sizable deficit that we have, and we've got to address ourselves to that issue.
Do you think there's some chance the president might change his mind on tax increases? He said just the other day, I know, that he's not, as long as he's not at
that juncture at this point, and his overall objective was to lower marginal rates, and I applaud that. I think we all do, and to increase personal exemptions as we do. The problem is that both of those lose revenue, and then if you're going to have a revenue neutral package, you've got to come up with some places where the increases come. Now, I find that generally speaking, in the service-oriented industries and businesses, they like it better because the tax rate for corporate entities comes down. But I'll tell you, for those that are in a heavy capital-intensive area where they need investment tax credit or more rapid depreciation write-off, you get a little bit different story.
But specifically, Congressman Michel, the disagreements we've seen, the differences we've seen between Republicans in the Congress, like yourself, like others in the Senate and the House, and the White House on the budget, the months of wrangling over the budget, tax reform now, trade. How do you explain it?
Well, it's not all, this isn't a business of all sweetness and light. And over a five-year period now nearly of a Reagan administration, 3 more to go, you couldn't project everything that was going to happen during the course of the initial campaign. Things will change. The president's shown himself to be flexible from time to time. I think very pragmatic. I have no problem with that. God forbid that I couldn't change my mind sometime on if I was stuck in cement on some issue and finally saw the light of day to change my position. I think the president is in that mold where, frankly, if the arguments are compelling enough to cause him to move, he'll move. But he's got to be given good, solid, forthright arguments that cause him to move.
And you think we're going to continue to see him make some moves on some issues that may surprise us?
Well, we hope so, and I'm an eternal optimist about it.
Congressman Robert Michel, we appreciate your being with us.
Thank you. Enjoyed being with you, Judy.
Robin?
Still to come on the NewsHour, the new pill that may change people's thinking about abortion, and a documentary look at the way of life is changing for Louisiana's Cajun shrimp fishermen. Next tonight, we focus again on the abortion issue, but from a very different angle. In the United States and Europe, doctors are now testing a new pill that they believe will radically reduce the need for surgical abortion and may also come to replace the present birth control pill. The new pill is described in this report for Britain's Thames Television by correspondent Dennis Toohey.
What the factory is producing is a pill that can terminate pregnancy, an abortion pill. The new pill is now going through clinical trials. 24-year-old Katina Stavry from Sweden has had 2 abortions, the first by surgery, the second by the abortion pill.
Well, you do it in privacy, and it's a lot easier than doing an operation. And you don't have to see a lot of doctors, just see the one who's giving you the pills.
There is no doubt that the new pill, known as RU486, brings a new dimension to the already sensitive and controversial subject of abortion. Socially as well as medically, it could make for fundamental change. Because RU486 is a chemical compound that can put an end to a pregnancy, that can cause a woman to abort. And that makes it dramatically, crucially different from existing contraceptives and existing morning-after pills.
The contraceptive pill works by inhibiting ovulation. The egg, which is created each month and holds the potential for human life, is not allowed out of the ovary and so cannot be fertilized. The morning-after pill works after the egg has left the ovary and has been fertilized. If taken within 72 hours after intercourse, it affects the lining of the womb so that the egg fails to implant. But the problem that hadn't been solved was what to do when the fertilized egg has implanted in the womb and pregnancy has started. Bicêtre Hospital in Paris, where the man who made that next step possible works. Étienne-Émile Beaulieu, a biochemistry professor, realized that there was a way of preventing the implanted egg from growing in the womb.
Pregnancy is necessarily supported by one single hormone called progesterone. That is, you need progesterone to start pregnancy, to continue pregnancy all over. So the simple idea is if you suppress progesterone action, there is no pregnancy.
The importance of progesterone was not Professor Beaulieu's discovery. Others were well aware of that. What he came up with was an understanding of just how progesterone is received into a woman's cells, how it comes to be locked in. This is how the pill RU486 works in the body of a pregnant woman. The fertilized egg, the embryo implanted in the wall of the womb, needs the progesterone hormone if it's to continue to grow. But the effect of the pill is to block the progesterone. Without that, the life of the embryo cannot be sustained. It decays and is evacuated through menstrual bleeding. Katina Stavry describes how it worked for her.
Well, I have to take 4 pills, half the pill in the morning and half in the evening for 4 days. And on the 4th day, I got an injection just to make the whole procedure go quicker, I suppose.
And what happened then?
Then it was meant to start bleeding, and it was bleeding for about 4 weeks, actually. It was quite a long time. Not very much, though, but she said it could bleed maybe 2 weeks, but I kept on for 4 weeks, so.
And after 4 weeks?
After 4 weeks, it seemed like the whole thing actually came out, so it was a bit later than they expected, I think, or they said maybe it goes like that sometimes, but I was surprised it came out that late.
Katina Stavry had her abortion 2 months ago. She was 6 weeks pregnant. All the 400 women throughout Europe who've taken part in the trials have been at no more than 10 weeks. And all have had to agree that they will have a surgical abortion if the pill fails. So far, the success rate is around 70%. And if, as in Katina's case, a backup drug is added, it's over 90%.
Are you concerned that there could still be side effects that you don't know about?
No, I'm not sort of concerned about it, but I mean, or convinced about it, but I hope it won't be any side effects, and I don't think so.
But you can't be absolutely sure yet?
No, of course not. I mean, even the doctors are not sure, so... But I think so. It's all right.
At the Paris headquarters of the manufacturing company, Roussel Uclaf, the man in charge of clinical development is well aware of the need to dispel anxiety.
The only way to be sure of the absence of side effect is to test a large number of women in many conditions and to define which is the minimal dose which can be used to induce abortion. So far, in these 400 women treated with 486, we had no report of any severe side effect. I mean by severe side effect, any life-threatening side effect. So we are very much confident that the drug is safe. But of course, we think that we need many hundred of women to be absolutely sure that the drug has no side effect.
But while termination of pregnancy is the purpose of the current British and other trials, Professor Émile Etienne Beaulieu, the man who devised the idea of the abortion pill, has an even more revolutionary concept in mind. He believes that RU486 need not be limited to dealing with known pregnancy, but could cross the line into contraceptive territory. Used once a month, he feels that the new compound could effectively replace the much criticized daily contraceptive or sequential pill.
Prospect is the following: for once a month, a cup of pills at the end of each month, even before the period, the woman not knowing whether or not she's pregnant. Okay. In principle, it should work. When I say in principle, it means that scientifically and practically we know it will work.
If you compare this compound with the classical sequential pill, it must be much safer. Indeed, the classical sequential pill, a woman has to take it nearly every day for her whole sexual life. And so she's completely soaked up with hormones and with all the side effects which are related with that.
Abortion, in my opinion, should more or less disappear as a concept, as a fact, as a word in the future. It's not just wishful thinking. I think it may be very significant.
So far in this country, the Federal Food and Drug Administration has given permission for testing of the pill in the United States, and such testing is underway. If and when the FDA is asked for permission to market or prescribe the pill to American women in general, it's expected to provoke strong opposition from anti-abortion forces. For a preview of the new debate that will generate, we have Sharon Camp, Vice President and Director of Education and Public Policy for the Population Crisis Committee, a private non-profit group promoting family planning worldwide, and also Dr. John Wilkie, President of the National Right to Life Committee. He is a former obstetrician who now practices family medicine in Cincinnati. Dr. Wilkie, will the Right to Life movement oppose this pill?
Absolutely, Robert, and very clear. This can never, as he said, cross the line into contraception. Contraception, properly defined, prevents the union of sperm and ovum and thereby prevents human life from beginning. Our Right to Life movement has no opinion on that. People in our movement are quite for it and quite against it. National Right to Life, representing over 2,000 chapters, begins its concern when human life begins, and that's at the completion of fertilization and within those first couple of hours. This is not a contraceptive, never can be. That is a tiny, living human boy or girl, complete and total, alive human, distinct from the mother, at the end of that first cell stage. They were incorrect in saying the fertilized ovum implants. That phase lasts only a few hours. The stage that implants is called a blastocyst, but then, you know, you and I were once little boys, and now we're men, and someday we'll be senior citizens, I don't know. Those are names for different stages of growth and development of a living human. This has already implanted in the nutrient lining of the mother's womb, this little boy or girl, and this drug, in effect, cuts off like withering on a vine, and it kills this tiny human. There is no question about this. It is a micro-abortion. We would oppose it, such as we can, totally.
How do you plan to fight it?
Well, obviously, the last word would be some type of either court decision or an amendment to our Constitution that would again protect all human life as early as law can protect it. That would outlaw abortifacients. We've done it for 200 years. We could do it again. Failing that, what could we do at this stage of the game? Well, there's a law being tested before the Supreme Court right now which would require doctors to inform the woman if they give her an abortifacient. Just as that court said a woman has an absolute right to abort, so she has an absolute right not to abort. Just as she has the choice to terminate her pregnancy to kill that little kid, so we believe she has the absolute right not to do it if she doesn't want to. Therefore, a law to inform the woman that this is not a contraceptive, this is an abortion, a microabortion, I'm sure would affect tens of millions of women who have no moral qualms about preventing fertilization, but very, very real qualms about killing the baby.
So that's a strategy in the Supreme Court. What about the drug companies who might make this in this country?
There is a nationwide boycott now that we initiated in full force a few months ago against the Upjohn Company of Kalamazoo, Michigan. They have on the market now 3 drugs, one particularly whose only purpose is to kill a baby in the middle 3 months of pregnancy. We have asked them to take that drug off the market.
It's not this pill.
It's a prostaglandin pill. That's a form of human hormones which causes violent labor and contractions of the womb and emptying of the womb, like labor. Okay, we've asked them to take the one off the market and to police the other 2, which have other uses, so that they're not used for abortions. Upjohn said no. We said, okay then, we're going to try and convince you. And we're initiating a nationwide boycott against the use of any of their medications. They are being called a death peddler. And we hope that by hurting them financially, which is our constitutional privilege to try to do, that they will see that it just doesn't make sense to market drugs whose purpose is to kill. That is a boycott. If a drug company tried this, we'd probably boycott them.
Okay. Ms. Kemp, do you think the advent of this pill we've just heard described changes the abortion debate?
Absolutely. I think it knocks the heart out of it. I think that Dr. Wilkie will agree with me that even though a lot of Americans have some concern about abortion, that concern grows as the fetus grows. In other words, Americans are more concerned or disturbed, those who are opposed to abortion, about late abortions. The way this product and others like it, and there are some even better leads in terms of an effective product than this, the way this is likely to be used is to bring down a missed menstrual period, or, as the doctor described, as a once-a-month pill. This means that we're talking about abortions, if in fact they can even be considered abortions, at a very, very early stage after conception. And in fact, since this process of implantation to be completely complete may take up to 14 days, this product may in fact be used by many women before pregnancy, being a relationship between a woman and a fetus, is in fact established. And I think that American citizens and people around the world are going to look at that kind of a method, which may in fact be used before implantation, very differently than they look at a 12-week surgical abortion.
I see. How successful do you think the campaign that Dr. Wilkie describes, that the right to life people would make against such a product, would be?
I don't think it's likely to be very effective, in part for the reason I described, and in part because the campaign which has been ongoing against the Upjohn Company over their prostaglandins doesn't seem to have made much impact on the company or its profitability. Ironically, however, the Upjohn Company has recently announced that it's getting out of contraceptive development altogether. Now, I don't pretend to know what's behind that corporate decision. It may have something to do with the discomfiture caused to Upjohn over its research into prostaglandins. I think it's more likely that after having pushed forward the injectable contraceptive Depo-Provera until its patent life ran out, it still doesn't have approval for that major new contraceptive method. So I think that a lot of companies with that sort of experience with the FDA, the enormous time and cost, and now the enormous product liability as represented, for instance, with the Dowkin Shield, has just discouraged a lot of companies from moving into contraceptive technology as heavily as I would hope they would.
Dr. Wilkie, Ms. Camp says this knocks the heart out of the anti-abortion movement.
Well, I would agree only to the extent that it will make it much more difficult for us. It's clearly easier for us to show a picture of what's left after an abortion, let's say right after she misses her second period. You can identify little fingers and hands.
It looks like a child, then.
It is a child. It's obviously a little baby that's been torn apart. Now, if you have to have a microscope to tell it's a baby, that will make our problem a little bit different. On the other hand, we're getting better and better at education. 10 years ago, there were abortions done at 6, 7, and 8 months of pregnancy, and nobody seemed to worry about it. I think our education now has turned a nation against that, and when they find out that abortions are done that late in pregnancy, there's a complete revulsion. And so we hear now even the most positive pro-abortionists say, hey, we can't have those late abortions anymore. Maybe we better throttle back a little. We are succeeding in America in a massive education job that is involving more people every year in finding out that this really is a baby. That's our job then.
I really can't agree that that's happening. Certainly the surveys, the polling data doesn't reflect that there's been a major shift in American opinion on this. I think Americans have always been concerned about abortion when it was illegal, now that it's legal. And obviously, those concerns are bound to be stronger if we're talking about a fetus that's 7 months old rather than one that's 7 days old. And I really can't believe...
His point is that under their education, that concern is becoming more abstract and going back closer to the...
But under their education, nobody's mind is really changing. That's what I'm saying. I don't think it's changed for the last 20 years.
Because we perhaps couldn't pursue that to its very end. He also made the point earlier, this cannot and will never be a contraceptive. It is
not technically a contraceptive. A contraceptive prevents the union of sperm and egg. It is also not necessarily an abortion or agent or abortifacient, because very often that drug is going, and others like it, are going to be used in a gray area between the fertilization of an egg and the establishment of a pregnancy.
That's what I'm talking about, from the attitude of a woman who might ultimately use something like this, as the French doctor suggested, regularly once a month. If that woman were using a contraceptive agent, she would not want a pregnancy. So would it matter in her mind whether it was to prevent a pregnancy or to abort one that had just occurred?
That it occurred within days or a couple of weeks? No, I don't think it would make any difference to most women. Now, there are certainly very committed people who are part of the anti-abortion movement who believe very literally that life begins the moment the sperm and egg unite. But that isn't what most people believe.
Oh, please now. It is a simple biologic fact taught in every textbook in every medical school for the last 50 years that it's human at conception. This isn't a carrot. This is living, it's growing, it is already sexed. Biologically speaking, human life is complete at the first cell stage.
But bring it to the question I just asked Ms. Camp. A woman who is taking, say, right now, a monthly birth control pill with the idea of preventing, she doesn't want a child at that particular time.
Which may, by the way, sometimes work in exactly this fashion.
Yeah. Would that gray area not greatly lessen the anxiety, which is the point Ms. Camp is making, or the revulsion, or the stigma, or whatever it is about?
Well, biologically, physically, actually, there is no gray area. One day after fertilization, you're 1 day old. When you implant, you're 7 or 8 days old.
Morally
when you're
and
born,
ethically,
you're 9 days, 9 months.
In the mind of the woman, morally and ethically,
psychic gray area,
psychic gray
but there is actually no other biologic gray area.
There is a legal gray area. For instance, if you look at German statutes, which in fact have been copied by a number of other countries, the German statutes define abortion as the termination of a pregnancy, and they define pregnancy as an established relationship between a woman and a fertilized
I'm very sorry
embryo.
that you turned the corner into that complicated new area, because we haven't got time to pursue that. But when and if this pill comes around, I'm sure we'll be back onto the subject. Dr. Wilkie,
so.
Ms. Camp, thank you both for joining us.
Thank
Judy?
you much.
Next Wednesday, on most of these public television stations, there will be a special evening of programming exploring the issue of abortion. The 3-hour special titled The Abortion Battle will include a range of pro- and anti-abortion films. Finally tonight, we take a look at the changing lives of the Cajun shrimpers who fish the Gulf coastal waters off Louisiana. The National Marine Fisheries Service is predicting a record shrimp harvest this year, even though 3 hurricanes have churned through the Gulf of Mexico already this summer. But it's not the bad weather that's worrying some shrimpers. They are more concerned about declining prices and competition from Vietnamese refugees who have settled in the area. Ken Johnson of Louisiana Public Broadcasting has this report.
Livingston Douay is a Cajun and a shrimper, just as his father was and his father's father. He is one of thousands of Louisianians who are direct descendants of the French Acadians who fled Europe in the 17th century. For nearly 50 years, ever since he's been old enough to swim and bait a hook, Douay has worked from sunup to sundown here in the Gulf of Mexico, in Barataria Bay and in Caminada Bay, trawling for such prized seafood treasures as white shrimp and crabs and speckled trout. It's the only life Livingston Douay has ever known. A simple life, but a good life.
Well, I was born in the bay right here. My grandpa used to have an oyster camp on a shell pile right here, and I was born during the morning before daylight. And Daddy asked Mama how we gonna name the boy, you know. So he was looking at the door, at the back door, and he saw the fort. He said, we're gonna name him Livingston. So that's why I kept that name Livingston. They named me after the Fort Livingston. C'est bon ce matin. On a fait un bon drag. C'est magnifique. On va faire de l'argent aujourd'hui, ça semble.
Now that may sound French, but it's actually music to a Cajun's ears. After making several passes along the Louisiana coast, Douay has told a friend and another longtime shrimper that it's good this morning. We made a good drag. Looks like we're going to make some money today. But all too often in the past, that hasn't been the case. Costs are up, and prices paid for shrimp are down. More and more shrimpers from Grand Isle to Golden Meadow are being squeezed out of business, unable to compete with the larger, more productive trawlers. Livingston Douay is one of them. After spending most of his life throwing out the nets, he's throwing in the towel. Reluctantly, he has sold his boat and given up his business. This would be his last trip into the often mesmerizing waters of the Gulf of Mexico, his mistress for more than a half a century.
There's not much shrimp, and your price is down. Your fuel is high, your gross is high, your nets, everything, your wear and tear for your boat's sky high all the time, you know. The shrimp go down, but the ice, your diesel fuel, they go up all the time, you know.
Makes it difficult then on the commercial fishermen.
Right. Oh, yeah, it's hard. Hard to tell you the truth, a boat like this, the way it looks, it's kind of hard to make a living with it, you know.
Many shrimpers are finding themselves in the same boat, one that's sinking rapidly in a sea of red ink. Why? Well, in many ways, the shrimp industry is subject to the same economic pressures as, say, the oil industry. When there is a glut in the market, when supplies are up, prices often are down. Take Louisiana, which leads the country in shrimp production. In 1983, fishermen here netted more than 76 million pounds of shrimp worth $133 million. That's an average price of about $1.72 a pound. In 1984, production rose by more than 30%, yet the total take went up only slightly to $153 million, or an average price of $1.44 a pound. This year could be a record harvest, but once again, prices are down.
This year there was a lot of shrimp to begin the May season for the brown shrimp, but the prices was bad, so although you caught a lot of shrimp, you didn't get as much money for it. And it just seemed like there's more boats to catch the shrimp there is, so the catch per boat is less each year. When the economy got bad, a lot of people lost their jobs, and they all had little boats, and they all turned to shrimping also that lost their regular jobs. So it put you right now in the shrimping industry, you may have 2-3 times more shrimp than what you had, say, 10 years ago.
Critics say another reason for the rapid increase in shrimp boats has been the influx of Vietnamese refugees into coastal communities. They came here by the hundreds, most of them simple, hard-working people who knew only one way to make a living, by fishing. At first, there were outbreaks of scattered violence from Texas to Florida as some Americans tried to protect what they considered to be their fishing grounds, a sort of squatters' rights, we were here first type of mentality. There was resentment, distrust, a deep dislike. But in recent months, many shrimpers, including the Cajuns, whose ancestors fled their native homeland as well, have come to grudgingly admire the Vietnamese.
They don't bother anybody, they do their work, and as a matter of fact, they work real hard. They're industrious people. They try and make money.
So from your standpoint, they're good competitors then?
Yes, they are. If a man wants to keep up with them, he'll put in a good day's work. Well, I believe they're good workers, you know. But what I've seen of them since they're here, you know, they're okay to me, you know. They work hard. When they go out there to drag, they got shrimp, they go dragging 24 hours a day, you know.
You've learned how to build boats pretty well, too.
Oh, yeah, they learned how to build boats. They're all getting nice boats, you know. At first, when they were here, they'd buy everything, you know, any kind of old boat, you know, to go fishing with. But now they're building their own boat, nice boat, beautiful boat, you know. Something like that, you know. They're gonna make it.
Hoa Nguyen fled Saigon when U.S. troops pulled out of Vietnam 10 years ago and the communists took over. His family, as well as most of his friends, were fishermen. Like many Cajuns, it was the only life he knew, the only life he ever wanted. Nguyen saved his money and built a small boat. He worked hard. He did well. Finally, he built a bigger boat, and then another and another. Boats valued at more than $250,000 each. It was the American dream come true. The dream Nguyen said that so many of his countrymen fought and died for during the Vietnam War.
Most of Vietnamese problem is English. The language is only problem. Or the job, the work you can make, you can do anything, but just English only.
Do you have any problem at all with the other fishermen down here, any of the shrimpers?
Oh, not much, because I don't know how about the other ports, like Texas, I don't know nothing about that. But in La Rose or Renown, everything is okay. The American people treat it right.
One thing that interests me, you have several boats here. You've got the St. Peter, the St. Peter I, the St. Vincent. How did you come about naming your boats?
Oh, the name here, I can't tell you like that because all Vietnamese people, they choose St. Peter because I believe most of Vietnamese fishermen is Catholic in here.
You're Catholic?
Yeah, I am Catholic. And we choose St. Peter because St. Peter, by the time before, he came from fisherman too. So we like to put St. Peter in our boat. That we choose for the name.
Most Cajun fishermen, like Livingston Dewey, believe in St. Peter too. Perhaps it's because of their religion, or because their ancestors were immigrants as well, that the Cajuns seem to understand what motivates the Vietnamese to succeed in their new country. Whatever their inner feelings, outwardly there is a quiet acceptance of the Vietnamese, even though they are slowly changing a culture that has survived hundreds of years.
You had to dip your shrimp with a dip net on the side of the boat, you know, and it was all by hand, not like it is today.
You feel after 40 years you're going to be able to sit back and look at that water and not get the itch to go out and shrimp?
Oh, it must be hard for a while, you know, I get used to it on land, you know. Because like I tell you, since I'm 13 years old, I've been on boats, you know. And always on the water, shrimp and stuff like that, you know. So,
it's been a good life, though.
Oh, yeah, it was good. Oh, yeah, good living, you know. Like you saw, it's kind of dirty sometimes, you know. but it's a good living. Nobody tell you what to do, you know. You do your own work. It's nice. I love it.
Once again, the main stories of the day. South Africa moved towards taking another measure limiting apartheid. Britain expelled 25 Soviet officials as spies following the defection of a top KGB agent. A federal judge refused to block tomorrow's test of an anti-satellite weapon. And for any baseball fans who missed it, it happened last night in Cincinnati. Pete Rose of the Reds broke the record held for exactly 57 years by Ty Cobb of the Detroit Tigers for most hits in a major league career. It was the first inning of a game with the San Diego Padres. Eric Shaw was pitching with 1 out, and here's how it went.
2 balls and a strike. Eric Shaw. Left center field, and there it is! Pete Rose does it! 4,192!
Good night, Judy.
Good night, Robin. That's our news hour for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night. I'm Judy Woodruff. Thank you and good night.
Funding for the MacNeil NewsHour is provided by AT&T. Whether it's telephone, information systems, long-distance services, or computers, AT&T. Funding is also provided by this station and other public television stations, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Coming up next, Doctor Who saves the life of Plantagenet, the leader of the colonists. Stay tuned.
Transcript, send $2 to Box 345, New York, New York, 10101.
Local broadcast of the MacNeil NewsHour is made